Welcome to the second module of Cultural Studies. In this module, we will be dealing with topics like the methods and methodologies of cultural studies, language and discourse, identity, and audience and reception studies. Let us define cultural studies. It may be defined as the analysis of a culture's systems of meaning production and consumption. How is meaning produced in a culture? How is it consumed by the members of a culture? For this purpose, cultural studies adopts methods from various disciplines. Cultural studies is a multidisciplinary subject and it takes or borrows methods from various disciplines which are influenced by theories and political readings. These political readings reveal to us the oppressive or dominant structures of society. Gender discrimination, race discrimination, which sex is given greater power in a society. These things are understood in analysis. Cultural studies believes we cannot read cultural artifacts only within the aesthetic realms. Now, what are cultural artifacts? Cultural artifacts are man-made objects, events, and activities as opposed to what is natural. The opposite of culture is natural. And any representation in a culture, a man-made artifact, that cannot be understood only within an aesthetic realm. It has to be connected to bigger structures of power. Cultural studies in its analysis asks, what does a particular artifact, event, or activity mean to a community, or a nation, or a culture? How is this meaning generated in a community? What values does the community consume from this particular artifact? These are things which are the subject of cultural studies. Let us look at some examples. All cultural forms are linked to institutions, the market, consumers, and regulatory bodies. Here we have an example of the Harry Potter franchise. It is not possible to deal with J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books as only fantasy writing. Within an aesthetic realm, that's the only perspective that we would take. But from the point of view of cultural studies, we cannot delink it from the giant publicity machine that operates around the book series. We are not just consuming a simple growing up story of a boy wizard, but an entire merchandise of icons, trivia, author speak, biography, autobiography, movies, games, puzzles. We do not buy a book, but an entire enterprise. All the hype and publicity machinery, that is the meaning generated by this particular cultural artifact. Some more examples. Let us take these three emblems: the tricolor, Gandhi Jayanti, cricket. What does the tricolor, Gandhi Jayanti, cricket mean to Indians? What do they stand for? What is their value to Indians as a whole, to particular communities in India, especially in an age of globalization where we receive cultural artifacts from all over the world? What do these things mean? Cultural studies interprets these artifacts as an expression of a particular culture or community. Cultural studies critiques them as visible political signs that reinforce a power play. Gandhiji is denoted as the father of the nation. What's the power play coming in here? patriarchy, father of the nation. The tricolor may be interpreted or critiqued as nationalism, that is, independence, political independence from colonialism. Cricket gains a national identity even though hockey is our acknowledged national game. Cultural studies interprets these signs of culture, these cultural artifacts, as part of a power struggle to acquire, maintain, or contest meanings. Who decides these meanings? How do they decide? Why do they decide? When the tricolor was chosen, did all Indians see it as truly Indian? Why does women's cricket not have the glamour that men's cricket has? These are the questions posed by cultural studies, and through analysis they interpret and criticize. Now let us look at the methods and methodology adopted by cultural studies for analysis. Let us differentiate between these two terms, methods and methodology. Method is the technique employed by the researcher to frame questions, to collect and organize data. That is the actual field work. Going out into the field, conducting surveys, interviewing sources, making a database. Method is to organize the questions to be asked, to decide who is to be interviewed, that is, which age group, which class of people, people belonging to which language community, then preparing questions and conducting interview. These are the things which are included in methods. Methodology refers to the political position and the interpretative strategies used by the researcher. That is the stand taken by the researcher. The researcher can never be a neutral being. Every researcher has their own particular individual stance or position. It is the critical approach, that is, methodology is the critical approach used to interpret the data collected. Methodology is identifying your own ideology, that is the researcher's ideology, and reflecting on your experiences before framing questions, interpreting collected data based on your assumption. That is, as a woman, I would be, as a researcher, taking a feminist stand, examining movies from a feminist perspective, looking at how women are portrayed in movies over the ages. Continuing the topic, we should collect a fairly large database. The study should draw upon a large number of sources for it to have any value. You can't limit yourself to a very small group. You have to conduct the study over a large group. It should be spread over a period of time if we need to make a generalized statement about cultural practices. That is, the study should be conducted at a particular time, then in another particular time, then again in another particular period of time, to see how change has taken place. Only then will the study or the analysis become complete. The recording of experience forms the foundation of all cultural studies. A sophisticated analysis of cultural artifacts requires a close examination of 5 basic elements. They are representation. How is something represented in a particular culture? Identity. How are identities created? Production of meaning, consumption of meaning. How it is regulated. This 5-point path is called circuit of culture. This is an analytic method used by cultural studies. Now we have to look into the importance of language in culture, and what exactly do we mean by language in cultural studies. How important is language in culture? What is language in cultural studies? Meanings and values, their exchange and circulation constitute a particular culture or community. That is, a culture is formed by a group of people, that is a community, sharing certain meanings and values, exchanging those meanings and values, passing them on. This communication creates community. Culture is about the role of meanings in any society. Culture is the sharing of meaning. Meanings are never fixed. They are arrived at through negotiation and change. And they are processes of language. What exactly do we mean by language here? It's not just words or print, but includes speech and painting and photography and movies and speeches and practically every cultural artifact which has meaning to a community is part of language. How is meaning created? Meaning and representation. In cultural studies, representation is the preferred term to speak about meaning. Representation is the process of meaning. It is the process of meaning generation and includes the word or the sign and its concept or meaning. Look at the slide. Word plus concept behind the word is equal to meaning. That is, we have a word, tree. The word tree brings a concept into our mind. Then we get a meaning. We understand what a tree is. Word, concept, meaning, context. That represents something. That is, we have the word tree, we have the concept of a tree, you get the meaning, and we look into the context. In the modern context, a tree means environment. A tree means shelter. A tree means refuge. This context is representation. Sorry, not this context. All these together, word, concept, meaning, context, all together form representation. Representation is the alphabet or ABCD of a culture. It is the language of culture. Let's take an example. Doll. What does it mean? It's a toy given to little girls. What does it represent in a particular context? Doll represents the qualities of femininity, softness, caring, nurture, grooming. This context is what we call a discourse. That is, language and meaning are connected to issues of class, power, ideology, and the material conditions in which it is being used. All expression and use of language are situated in a context. This context is called discourse. What does a doll mean in a particular context? The context that we live in. This context is what we call discourse. I'll demonstrate. The connection between gender and toys. What does a doll mean in a particular culture, in a particular context? What do tools mean in a particular context, in a particular culture? Here we have an example of how meaning is generated and naturalized in a culture. Note the power play here in a patriarchal society that sees women as the second sex, confining her to the roles of weakness and helplessness. She is to be protected and to be exploited. These are the meanings which come through in the doll and in the tools, the toys which are given to little girls and little boys. These meanings are naturalized without us even knowing about it. Dolls are delicate and require grooming. Tools are tough and are used for construction and repairs. Grooming and care are feminine qualities and jobs. Repairs and constructions are male jobs and responsibilities. Dolls inculcate feminine qualities. Tools inculcate masculine qualities. The text here is toys. Language here is the meanings of these toys. And the discourse or the context is patriarchy and gender differences. A summing up of the points that we have covered so far. To study society is to study culture. What is culture? Culture is about communication and making meaning. Objects or cultural artifacts, events and activities which are man-made, they acquire meaning and value through negotiation, and these meanings become naturalized. We don't even think about giving girls dolls and boys tools. It's taken for granted. It's naturalized. And we are influencing, demarcating what a girl should be and what a boy should be. These meanings create identity. What is identity? Identity is determined by the roles played by a person. We have many different roles in lives, and your identity is based on those many different roles. Identity is constituted or built up through experience. Experience includes the consumption of signs and making of meaning from signs. This we had already looked into. That is, identity is created through experience. Our experience includes consuming signs like the doll and the tools, and making of meaning from the signs. That is, knowing that a girl's job is to take care, to nurture, to groom, to be soft. And from tools we understand that boys are to be tough, hard, and responsible for repair and construction. These are the meanings that we have consumed from the signs or the text or the language of toys. Experience makes us believe that we are free agents, but in reality we are victims of discursive and ideological regimes. We are not even aware of how ideologies of a culture control us. We do not always have the power of choice. That is simply an illusion created through representation. Now let us examine identity with agency. What is agency? Agency is tied up with identity. An identity determines the degree of agency one possesses or does not possess. What is agency? The power to determine one's actions and life. It is also socially produced. Just like identity is socially produced, agency is also socially produced. That is, an individual's ability to act is limited by the context in which she or he lives. Your power to decide is determined by society. Your agency is determined by the context in which you live. Identity is based on a location within a system of relationships and discourses. An example to make this clearer. Discourses, that is context, determine an individual's identity, agency, and actions. Discourses are structures of power that generate particular meanings or identities. Here we have an example of space and urban planning that demonstrates the question of power, identity, and agency. You can see here in the picture a busy railway station and the parking lot of the railway station. What are the vehicles parked there? We can see only cars. Cars alone have parking space allotted in railway stations. Those who do not have a car or cannot afford a taxi have to walk with their luggage to catch buses and autos. Space is reserved for the higher income group. We have here a car culture. In terms of identity, the pedestrians and owners of two-wheelers lack spatial privileges. That is, people who walk and people who come on two-wheelers do not have the privileges that car owners do. Representation of space has very concrete material effects on individuals and their agency. Your identity as a car owner determines the degree of the agency that you possess, and if you don't have a car, you don't possess that agency. This is the message that is coming through in this particular representation. Culture studies analyzes the structures of power that influence identities and agency.